So this is the final countdown, and then you can go out and having a party. I think you're longing for it. So when an institution turns 25, it marks more than just a milestone. It gestures towards lives and aspiration in a lived life together, through seasons of expansion and austerity, optimism and critique. I have been here for 23 years. Nearly half of my life, I said nearly, invested in the shared world, or the shared work of worlding education. First, I was affiliated with educational psychology, and later, since 2011, the very transdisciplinary Department of Education Studies. Employees embody the memories of institutions. We recall the bright curtains in the banquet hall, the musty scent of tobacco in the B building, the fun at a Paris conference, the gasp when we read the graffiti declaring "Diesem Land bleibt Deutsch" at a brick in the clock tower at DPU. And these are not just recollections. They are affective intensities that shape what it feels like to teach, to do research, to strategize, and to hope from within. As part of preparing for today, I turned to our local archives, specifically to our recent self-assessment report in education studies. Besides being very struck by the sheer volume of our work, because we do work a lot, I was moved by the tone of the report, the ambitions, and the careful articulation of what you could call an ethico-political vision. Our shared words were, and now I'm quoting, "a leading, conceptually rich and socially engaged research unit, combining theoretical innovation with applied impact to expand our international and interdisciplinary collaboration, enable meaningful scholarly careers, and cultivate a just academic environment." The report depicted a research culture striving to truly matter and make a difference, and it portrayed scholars aiming to conduct research not only about the world, but for the world and with the world. So our work involves carefully curating and juggling with ideas, methodologies, and theories. We spoke about education, about sustainability, diversity, digitalization, of the care required to navigate easily politicized fields, and a care for the researchers themselves. That was indeed a generous statement. And that was then. Because since this report was written, that's barely a year ago, the geopolitical transformation of the world that began many years ago have really intensified. Rereading the report also felt like resonating with Die Welt von Gestern, you know, Stefan Zweig's novel, describing the time before, between, and after the two big wars. And when walking down the corridors of DPU, you sense this affective load and the anxiety over the course of developments. In the US, a self-identified hillbilly writing elegies now combats research and researchers, quoting Nixon's infamous line, "The professors are the enemy." Projects are cancelled, words are forbidden, scholars are fired or exiled. These developments were, of course, already set in motion years ago, and we have had long seen the consequences in other countries, such as Hungary. Politicians in Australia and in New Zealand follow. And while this ain't Texas, as Beyoncé sings, the universities in the Danish territories remain deeply entangled with these global currents. So how do we actually protect and cultivate space to fulfill the ambition that we once dared to name looking ahead in a report? Perhaps an anniversary is exactly the moment to engage in collective memory work and to not acknowledge the longer arc of our institutional lives and to think a bit forward. I arrived here as an assistant professor during a time of expansion, a time of Mode 2.0 governance, and we were to sell research, innovate through partnerships. Big companies, EU bodies were suddenly very interested in education and in diversity. Already in 2007, I and colleagues wondered about who was ready for the results. Not only the private sector asked for useful research. Walking down the memory lane, I picture the Minister of Education sprinting up the tower stairs out here, determined to fix Denmark's poor PISA results, while our then Chancellor, Lars Henrik Schmidt, raced behind, chain swinging, metaphorically and quite literally, trying to keep up with the political ambitions. From the same period, and I think Klaus remembered this too, from the same period, I remember the scandal of cartoon graffitis, dick pics, supposedly painted by feminists after our chain-swinging chancellor in public warned that hiring too many women would lead to too much babbling and too small shoes in the auditorium. We, the newly hired women, didn't do the tagging, but we felt the sting. And in this banquet hall, I recall an American professor of education delivering a keynote called "This is Your Father's Paradigm," where she critiqued the trends in education governance. Afterwards, half of the audience, including me, snuck off to update our publication lists. While critique is possible, there are still structures affecting our drives and motivation. I also remember a very recent resolution in the Danish parliament on excessive activism, aligned with the populist political discourse that years earlier exiled the Central European University in Budapest to Vienna. And I surely remember how our management at that moment actually had our back. Thanks for that. Just as I recall the despair and the follow-up controversies 2 years ago, when I and more than 20 experts submitted a report to the Minister of Education that he dismissed as sloppy, not because it addressed gender, that was the case of it, but because it dared to use research to educate about gender. Most recently, I recall the silent, trembling anxiety and hesitancy around signing a petition in December 2023, condemning the war in Gaza, calling for academic boycott. And meanwhile, where we were hesitant, Ukrainian scholars did not have the luxury to hesitate. They didn't even have a campus anymore. So memories indicate that academic life has for long been precarious, politically charged, and affectively intense. The question is, what can we learn from our archives and our own memories, also before DPU and beyond DPU? How might we teach and research with responsibility today? One way, I think, is to foster intergenerational exchange, a shared space for reflecting on the world that we care for and the world we want to live in. Such dialogue may also counteract the ageism and the competition, making room for more responsible knowledge practices for democratic building or subject formation with diversity literacy. Reading the report, I sense a regenerative path that is emerging, perhaps beyond the nearly taken for granted divide between useful educational research and critical pedagogies. In reading the self-assessment, I sense an urge to revitalize debate on care, on justice, and on objectivity, as Maya have also mentioned. My colleagues' persistent inquiry of privatization, funding, education economics, youth aspiration, cyberbullying, learning labs, AR, social sustainability, harassment, career counseling, academic freedom, nationalism, indigenous cosmologies, it all involves ethics of knowledge. It is not just thematic, it is, to paraphrase Donna Haraway, worlding. It's a way of worlding. It asks, how can education matter otherwise? What are the effects and the ethics of what we know? How may we, as DPU people, world differently? As scholars, we are committed to staying with the trouble, to craft concepts, produce empirical work, and enable one another to become responsible. Today's celebration, I think, can hold both joy and doubt, a moment to sense and remember what actually mattered and commit to what still must matter. So to care for a university is to remember it and to reimagine it. Thank you for staying with me for the last 10 minutes and for everyone who have been here for 25 years.